It's crazy because we've had concept art done by players that have started quest lines. It's things like that have started.
That is amazing.
And there's ways we figured out that we can cheat the system at certain points as well. Because sometimes you just have to make things work. Yeah. Sometimes we get caught, but sometimes it's like, oh, how did you do that? Oh, okay. Oh, we can do that properly in Engine.
Should we record that? I don't know.
Hello, my name's Grace. I'm senior audio designer here at Jagex in Cambridge. I primarily work on our RuneScape franchises, so that'd be RuneScape and Old School RuneScape. I also look after the marketing side of assets that we do within the business. My day-to-day job is mainly making assets. Soto would be sound design, also do music composition, technical integration. Our roles are generally a little bit of everything, which gives us a nice brand of variety to our day jobs. And we have a central team within the company. So with the audio team of Jagex, we're split up into sub-projects. So some of us are on RuneScape side, some of us on undisclosed projects that I have to be careful I don't say anything because I will get told off. But we're in the luxury position that because we are more of a central resource, we do get to work and share assets across projects. So we're not just working on one thing continuously. So it makes it a little bit different to other people in other roles.
We have always people in our group, who are students. I teach sound design to game design students. We have people who are looking for their first job. Can you tell us a little bit about the career path you had? How did you end up? Because I always find these stories fascinating, how people got to the jobs they have today.
I had no idea I could be an audio designer for games as a job. I had absolutely no clue. I was at school learning how to play the keyboard and how to sing in a choir. I was in bands and I was prepping myself to work in the music industry somewhere, whether it be studio work, being a session recordist. And that's kind of where my higher education led me. I went to college straight after secondary school, high school, where I did my foundation degree in popular music. So it was more a focus on how to write music within certain styles, identify areas of styles within the industry, kind of looking at trends and where they were going. It was very much kind of studio technical background, learning how to set up sessions, making those modules where we had to make business cases based on what we wanted to do for if we were recording local bands. It was very almost business focused rather than compositional side as well. But it did have modules in like sound synthesis, recording techniques, mic placements. So many drum kits were mic'd through those years at college and recorded, and so many amplifiers as well. By the end of that 2-year degree, we were running in parallel with the Bachelor of Arts honour degree that was running at the local university. So was invited to go over to join the third years to then get the BA degree in creative music technology, which I did. And that kind of opened me up into more broader areas of where sound could take me, because we were looking at radiophonica, sonic arts, even broached on the subjects of music therapy and kind of those kind of aspects. So the last year kind of broadened my horizons a lot more, but still nothing that could relate or nothing that for me that kind of linked audio to games, which was kind of a strange one. So I finished university and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, because I was still hoping to work within the music industry, whether it would be studio time or writing songs. I knew how to write music. I could handle that. So I was working part-time at Game, which is a retail outlet, hardware, peripherals and games. I was working part-time in a business centre, working on the switchboard, which was not my best plan. I did more than one thing wrong with that. And then I ended up playing Mass Effect, and I loved the soundtrack so much. I listened to it to death. I still listen to it now, because the stuff that Jack Wall was doing with the symbiotic relationship with the synthetic sounds and the orchestral stuff was just, it was mind-blowing to me at the time. And then I sat there and I went, well, can I do that as a job? And then I was just like, okay, maybe I can do this. So I started researching into positions within the games industry, which I'd completely not looked into whatsoever. And found that, yeah, there were positions where you could write music for games, you could do sound design for games, VO artists. There's so many opportunities, just completely, I had no clue about it, no idea. So I was kind of looking for jobs and for placements, and I started doing freelancing work with some people I knew from university. It was still indie games that people were doing and playing around with. It was kind of more sound design for linear media, which I'd done some of before through uni. So it was like mini films people were making, kind of where I got my love for kind of more the marketing kind of end and more trailer kind of sound design sort of work. But then I saw the job application for Jagex, which was for a junior audio developer, which sounded like a bit of an odd role title at the time, because I thought, okay, maybe that's more code, which I don't know. I thought that might be a problem, but I applied for it. I didn't actually get it. They actually went with a guy called Chris, who was in-house at the time working in player support. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Doesn't matter. Keep applying for other jobs, see what happens. And the role came up again 8 months later. And I was like, right, well, I know what I'm doing this time. I know they want a junior position. They want a focus on synthesis, because all the game assets, all the sound effects are all generated with the in-house synth. I know I can write music, because they also want composer, because they want a role that kind of combines both. So I was like, right, I will send you some music tracks I've written, and I will send some synthesis stuff. So there was like a helicopter, there was some birds, there was kind of a coastal scene I'd put together with synth stuff that I designed all through Reason. It was kind of the grain table synth I used to use quite a lot of the time for that synthesis kind of side. And yeah, I got a phone call interview, which was a really interesting chat with a guy called Ian, going through how I would theoretically design sounds for an area part of the game. And then I had my trial day, in which I had to write a piece of music for a cave which had some goblins in, and then I had to use the in-house tools to design the sounds for the goblins. So by the end of the day, both the music and the sound design was in-game and playable through the engine. And it was a long day. I was a wreck by the end of the day, quite honestly. And we'd been to the pub at lunchtime. It was just it felt more disastrous than it was. It was really interesting to see, because it was, what I noticed, especially for the interview, was the speed of integration which was happening for the assets. I'd written stuff, I'd made sound effects, and I'd plumbed them in within a day, and to me that was quite impressive. But yeah, we had discussion. I had another phone interview a couple of days later to talk to the rest of the team, and then I got offered the job, and I've been here ever since, and that was 14 years ago. But
congratulations.
Thank you very much. I was never, see, I tell people it's 14 years, but it doesn't feel like it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the fun things, I think, with the kind of job that we have, is that we get to be creative and have a lot of fun and enjoyment in what we're doing. It doesn't feel like it's a proper job. I know that sounds really funny sometimes, but you try and explain your work to people, and like, you actually do that for a day job. It's like, yeah, no, I get to write music, I get to do some sound design, I get to go out and record stuff. I get to tell voice actors how to be a gnome or be a goblin. I mean, It's quite random, but it's quite involved as well. So,
in that sense, a little bit like the memes you see online. What my friends think I'm doing, what my family thinks I'm doing, what I really do.
exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like if anyone comes to the studio and has a look around, they just see a room full of stuff and it's like, what's all this? It's like, oh, that's just a pile of Foley stuff that we're kind of wrecking when we're going to be recording things. And yeah, all those instruments, yeah, we just play everything. We don't play anything well, but we play stuff because we got to figure out how to put it all together. So
what I would be interested in, the synth examples you did, were they asked for, or did you just you knew what they wanted and needed in their pipeline, so you kind of sent them along and did put in the extra work?
It was specified on the application,
okay.
which it was the same application I'd done the first time round.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew there was stuff that I could work on for those to make them more appropriate second time round. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a heads up, not much, but yeah, there wasn't any way I was going to beat Chris on the first run. Not meeting him afterwards. He was far too good. But yeah.
Were there any demo reel requirements? Because in today's day and age, there's the Power Up Audio Twitch stream where they look at demo reels, show reels. It seems there has been a trend of how long it should be, what should be in there exactly, quite a format almost. Was that the case back then as well?
No, not for me. It was kind of strange because it was examples of what they were asking for, what you would be doing in your job. It wasn't a case of do a redesign test or go and show us examples of middleware integration, because with RuneScape it's all in-house tools. There was no middleware to speak of that was being used at the time. The game had a big following, but it wasn't viewed as a mainstream game at that point. I think because it was coming from that browser-based background of game as it was back then, it was very much you were making assets per need, so you didn't need to show a whole load of extra skills because that's stuff you would pick up as you went along. So if any sense, I guess being the junior role, it was kind of an easier way to get into the industry.
Yeah.
At that point, I think I would have more difficulty these days if I was trying to apply, just purely because the competition is so high now.
It's super high.
The standard is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Kasia and Andrew are here with us in the chat. I mean, they applied to us last April time, I think, and we had about 300 applicants for 2 junior positions. So any kind of application to jobs at the moment is phenomenal, and the amount of effort that has to be put into is the bar is so raised at the moment. It's incredible to kind of be allowed to give your views on someone's work. It's always it's quite humbling to kind of go to have someone come to you and go, how can I make my application better? How can I improve what I'm applying or how I'm showing my work to someone? It's like, it's a very personal thing going through someone's show reel and someone's kind of thoughts and emotions that they put into something to show and apply for a job.
That's exactly what I'm seeing as well on our Discord server. When somebody places their show reel into the chat, but they are so open to feedback, they are sucking it all in and improving upon it. It is really mind-blowing sometimes to see, because there are many more better sound designers than me that put their show reel up, and I say, oh, that is really excellent work. It is kind of humbling. It's super cool. You mentioned that you are 14 years at Jagex, and Kasia is here, junior, Andrew as well. How are you set up, and how does that work? Junior, regular, senior. What are kind of the different aspects of the job that you have in the team? So
juniors are generally, we take them at face value. It's a learning curve to be able to use our in-house stuff and to also get them on board with the projects, which is part and parcel. So from the junior stage, we're kind of just helping them hone basic skills and getting them on board. I mean, I say that, and both of them are more than qualified for the jobs we're giving them, which is kind of what we want. The main thing to do that we're trying to do is just kind of encourage them just to push themselves further, which is what you want from any kind of junior position and upwards. So we're not giving them entire full content releases in terms of RuneScape content releases. It's more aspects within them, like it would be ambience kind of sets for new areas, or it would be NPC design for certain creatures in a new area or a new piece of content, or it could be ownership of one feature of a new section of game design in a game that I can't talk about, things like that. And things. When it gets to mid-level, that's when kind of more responsibility comes into managing entire projects as a total. So say for RuneScape, as an example, when we do a piece of content release could be 4 to 6 hours gameplay for a player, but in terms of assets, we're talking maybe a couple of music tracks, we're talking sound effects, depending on what's needed. If it's new area, we're talking any VO requirements. So the mid-level kind of takes a lot more ownership over the project and a bit more direction. When it comes to senior role, which is where I'm at and where another one of our team, Ashton, is, essentially we're acting lead on projects. So myself, I'm kind of acting lead on RuneScape and Old School, but it means that from our perspective, when we're in senior position, we're looking at the long-term vision for the game and the longer-term aspects of where the game direction is going from an audio perspective. With RuneScape, it's slightly different because obviously it's a 20-year-old game. I mean, it's been a part of some people's lives for a very long time. So when we're talking about audio vision for the game, we have to be receptive to people's preconceptions and what they remember about the game and kind of direction-wise, where we're going to take it, how we're going to develop it. We have to handle contracts, it's technical improvement plans, kind of long-term for the next 6 to 12 months. It's looking through resource management. It's looking through the media aspect as well for all the marketing for the content. And it's also judging how much we can progress as a team with what we've got and what we need to do to progress further as well, because it's not just for the game, it's also for the team members, because progression is core for everyone and everything. So anything we can move and work towards that is always a plus for us all.
So you're also having, you talked about kind of one-on-ones you have, so you're mentoring the juniors as well.
Yeah.
Much more planning, resource management, managerial tasks that you have to have, the overview of the whole project and integration. So you know the project very well, you know the ins and outs, what takes how long, you can work with the production, the planning, the release planning, etc. So this is all on the senior level when that comes together.
Yeah, it's very much kind of when you're moving from mid to senior, it's kind of the realization that you've worked on projects to a certain amount, so you know what's involved content-wise. You can accurately scope demands for the projects, but you're also kind of giving that knowledge back to the juniors. It's like I have my one-to-one sessions with Kasia because it's my mentee, so we go through how we did the scope on the project, we look back on what we completed, how we did it, what ways we can improve it, and it's just building that cycle into the development plan and also the project plan, because I'm a big believer in the fact that as much as I can tell you how things to do, how things should work and how things should be done, it's very much done by experience. So the more you get to do it, the more we can talk it through, the more we can evaluate. And to be honest, we both learn in both ways. Anyone involved, everybody learns something new. There's no one that can say they know absolutely everything from every single process. So the more you kind of get the conversations going, it's a much better way of getting it done.
I can only second that. The amount of things I learn from other people, even from my students that I have, the way they ask a question, I know if I explained it well or not, or the kind of questions they still have. I find it so valuable. You said 300 applications, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I guess as a senior, you also get to look at the applications, pick some favorites, etc. If you would say, what's the current theme, or what can somebody do from a career perspective? What skills are important? What did you look for? You know, you have you see so many, you spot patterns, things that are going well, things that are...
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, when you're looking at show reels at the moment, what's coming through and what people are asking for is there's an awful lot of sound redesigns going on, which are great. I appreciate taking an existing game and trying to have a go at redoing it. I mean, as many as people try and redo the God of War axe, it's just not quite gonna measure up to where to what I enjoy about that axe. But it's probably where I would start myself as well. But what I do look for, especially in people's show reels, is showing me also the technical integration side as well. People that have either tried with WYs or they've tried with Fmod or even Fabric. A few people have done that with Unity, so it can show you're aware of not only what you're designing, but also how your sounds are going to be used in an end product.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing it and listening to it within a game environment just adds that little extra detail for me that I'd really like to look at.
Let's go a little bit into the RuneScape direction then.
Adventurers aren't born. They are forged. And I was forged, face first, in the fire of the King Black Dragon. I'd have been toast if it wasn't for a passing adventurer. She saved my life. She gave me a shield. And I had my purpose. I was gonna slay that dragon.
RuneScape has been out for so long. What would you say the special areas are, or what's different in designing sound and integrating it for a game that has been out for so long and that is constantly evolving in comparison to traditional releases?
RuneScape's a live game. You don't have your stage gates as you would with normal regular game development. There's 20 years of history already there. There's 20 years of audio already in there. And you need to take on board, because any new content that's going to go in will either have to interact within existing areas, or it will be new areas, but they will be linked to old content. So what we have to be careful of is, especially if we are mapping areas that are already existing. So what developers might do is actually do it's essentially instancing of pre-existing areas. So they will, for a quest, say it's using part of the surface world, they will instance that section of map, change whatever's mapped down, but dynamically. So we then have to do the same thing with the audio to match and bring up to date to make sure that it's representative of what the map stage is at that point. But we have to be careful how players can get into those instant states, because players can do any number of quests in any kind of order. There's only a few quest paths they have to do successively all the way through, like from A to B to C. We have to be careful that if they can manage to get from A to C, we're not sticking them in state B that's having a knock-on effect for quest completion or for the audio that's actually, so I've got like a battle ambience that's going on, and actually it's that state of the map, there is no battle going on. So we have to do it. So a lot of our integration kind of style with RuneScape is actually through our RuneScript code, which sits on top of our engine code base. What it means is a lot of the integration is actually code itself. We don't really do any middleware integration. It's all hard coded, purely because that's the engine client was made bespoke for RuneScape, coming from browser into a downloadable client. So it's a mixture of C++, C#, and almost Lua kind of code. It's almost object-based code at that point. And what you end up doing is a lot of the sound integration you do with RuneScript, you do kind of prep work. So you will make your configs, and then the configs will be used by the other tools that you use. So we've got like a map editor tool, what we call Inca, which is essentially our animator tool, because animation work's done in Maya, but we do a proprietary tool on top of that we can add sounds to animations, sync them up, and do the parameter controls. And then we also do, we can do integration straight through to code-based scripts, which means we have manual control over scripting assets things like cutscenes, things like 2D image sequence cutscenes, and also anything that we need to do with VO goes directly straight into the code base itself.
So the integration part that you mentioned with the script is somebody in the engine, with bigger, better, badder coding skills needed to integrate those at the certain stages, or are you really able to use the config file alone and add the sounds to certain actions, to certain places?
Yeah, all integration is us with RuneScript.
Okay.
So anything engine is done by engine team coders, which is underneath and out of our control. RuneScript sits on top. So we are the ones that are plugging into code. We are the ones that are sometimes breaking the dev's quest when we've added something we shouldn't do. And we're also the ones that are configuring up our own data files so that we can then use those for certain aspects with animations and maps and things like that.
Okay.
We have
it has evolved over the last 14 years so that you have the whole scripting capabilities.
Yeah.
And you can integrate everything yourself. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Originally, it was a case we would make assets and hand them over. So it would be like the engine team would do the integration of themselves. But they kind of realized the fact that we could do a lot more if we had access ourselves. It was just a case of building the extra code hooks on top to be able to give us the tools we needed to kind of play around with the integration as well. So we do have an amount of control where we can play around with the RuneScript elements to get the most out of the system. And there's ways we figured out that we can cheat the system at certain points as well, because sometimes you just have to make things work. Yeah. Sometimes we get caught, but sometimes it's like, oh, how did you do that? Oh, okay. Oh, we can do that properly in Engine.
Should we record that? I don't know.
but no, it's kind of open, and we're very lucky in that we've got the autonomy just to kind of try things ourselves.
Mm-hmm. With it being an MMO where potentially many people can be at the same place. Yes. What kind of means do you have of controlling the sound, and what, in a multiplayer environment, what sounds the other clients hear? Sure. Are there any?
They can, yeah. So we can. So with RuneScape, we can change what audio is heard by what player at what point. Anything that's on the map or within the instance will be heard by everyone. That's we can't touch that. That's just the instance. And generally, if they're in the same environment, that's not too much of a problem. If it's an instance, it's already changed, and we probably updated to match that anyway. When it comes to putting things onto animations, we can specify whether it's local client or third client. And then also, if we're putting stuff into script, we can essentially aim the sound at the right client at the right time. Okay. So we can either play it to the local, or we can play it to the what we call essentially the other clients. So they get a slightly different version of what's being heard. So you can do both at the same time. So there is a level of control on what we can play between one and the other.
Are you making a lot of use for that? What would be the cases, for example, where you would use that system?
The main reason is normally we do it with things like MTX pets. We have a lot of pets in games. So MTX pets it's pets that people can buy and have as like companions that will follow them around within the game. A lot of the games, it's things that people can buy. It's animations like rest animations or running or skill animations that they can really customize their character with. But not everybody wants to hear everyone else's kind of customization. So if you've got someone who's bought a custom animation for hitting a tree, but actually they're setting off dynamite or they're getting a dragon to eat the tree, you don't need to hear that all the time. It might be a little bit much, especially if you're trying to take down a yew that's right next to the oak tree that they're going for. It might be a little bit much. So so stuff with the animations is great because we can immediately do anything for customization for the player. Will be focused anyway, so that's almost immediate. That's just a mandatory set. And then if there's any animations that need to be broadcast to anyone else, we can set up how far with the limit scaling and roll off, so we know attenuation wise how far it's going to reach, and kind of play a little bit by ear on the overlap as well.
What I was wondering, because you wrote me in the beginning, right? I wrongfully titled you as senior sound designer, and then you said senior audio designer, because in your team you have many people who do all the aspects, right? The integration, the sound, and the music. Is that a kind of a special thing that developed in at Jagex?
I think it all started because there was originally just one audio person, and that was it. So
traditionally, they needed to.
It was just
cover
you just
everything.
needed to do everything.
Yeah.
So when I started, it was a case you were being hired to make sounds and write music. That was part of the application. That was part of the test. And when you got to work, you were given a piece of RuneScape content that was going to be released, and you were in charge of it. So you had to write the music for it. You had to do the sound design for whatever was required. And I think as that went on, and as the company grew up, we realized that there was much more involved with the roles. There was much more expansion needed, and there was room for specialist roles to slowly make their way in. As we've gone through, we've realized, okay, we can outsource more than we used to. Everything used to you had to be in-house and had to be done by everyone, but now we've got more budget, we have more place for more headcount as well. So we can take the time to look at people who can specialize in certain roles that we weren't capable of doing that before.
That is super interesting to me, because we had other guests on, and I also watched videos of AAA studios of that have so specialized. They have sound producers that only organize the people who are working in the sound department. They have sound QA people. They have technical sound designers who only integrate the sound.
Mm-hmm.
They have a 20 people team, but then 3 sound designers that just produce the sounds. A huge team, but just 3 people producing the actual content, which is also kind of crazy. But this is the way of if you really can specialize, you have a different output, but then you also have less opportunity to go back and forth. So what is your favorite, what's your favorite thing? If you could, if you have all these things to choose from, what would you go to?
I still enjoy editing music, I think is where I'm going to put the boundary line. I can compose to a degree, and it's served me well over the years, but I am much happier editing someone else's to purpose. I enjoy creating music systems to work for games, and I enjoy editing music to work with those systems. I very much enjoy playing around in WS's music system, because I can get so much out of it with simpler materials. I really do enjoy it. I love getting stems from composers and just playing around with putting stems together, because you never quite know what you're going to end up with, especially when you put it into random sequencing containers and line them all up and get your entry and exit cues all in the same place and try and play through. And it just excites me all the time. And then I'm also the slightly sad one who loves making a production schedule as well. So I like lining everything up and knowing when things are due to come in, who's doing what, making sure people have what they need to do their job properly. I'm very much a people person. I'm like, if you don't have what you need, let me know. I will make it happen, and I will get it done for you.
So kind of the sound producer's role as well.
Yeah. If we need to find some budget to go and do some extra recording, I'll make sure we can find it from somewhere to go and make it happen. So yeah, I like that kind of production stuff too. I think it's probably where I'm going kind of career-wise at my point. It's like, I've done the conversation, I've done the design stuff. I kind of like letting other people do it and then playing around with their stuff afterwards.
Do you think, though, this is a natural path as we are, get more and more experienced in our jobs? Because when I started out, I couldn't imagine having any sort of, leading production administrative role. But I do enjoy it more and more, just getting the stuff out of people's way so they can do their best work. I enjoy that so much. Absolutely satisfactory. I agree. It's
just one of those things, because if someone's happy in what they're doing, you're happy that you can make it happen for them. And as much as sometimes there is crunch, sometimes we have to push to get things done. but as much as a positive like appearance and attitude that we can put towards it, the better position we're going to be in, and the better position people are going to be in to learn as they're doing it as well.
And then there are the things that I would like to more or less not do if I could. What are the things that you would, delegate to somebody else, or would be happy if it would just disappear? What are the kind of the really hard times that we try to forget?
The combat systems.
Really?
Yeah. I'm happy doing the recording session for the assets, but when it comes to plugging the bits in for people taking damage and swinging, I think it was because as much as I enjoy turn-based combat games like Final Fantasy, the combat sounds just are a bit much for me.
Yeah, it's always a lot of sounds as well, quite repetitive, I can imagine, with all the swings and all just the amount of sounds that need to be done.
I mean, it's fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy swinging stuff around in a recording booth and flailing around with giant swords or whatever. But I think it kind of comes into my not love of file editing as well, probably. Yeah, Andrew's laughing because that's what he's been doing all week. But yeah,
good job, Andrew.
One for the team, Andrew. Yes. It's not my favorite. I'll hands up, it's not my favorite.
You mentioned Wise, but you said in RuneScape you have your own in-house tools.
Yes.
So if we could switch and see, could you give and show us your in-house tools, because this is what really the geeky part.
Hang on,
that I love about that. I think you prepared something that you can show how this works.
So I can't strictly show you the RuneScape Cody stuff, but I can show you the JagFX tool that we used for designing sounds within Old School RuneScape itself. Welcome to the JagFX synth. Let me just.
So this is an engine you wrote that came from the original web browser roots.
So this
you somehow ported to the clients now.
This synth tool was originally made by the game creator over one Christmas, because it was needed that we needed something to make sounds within the game that wasn't just recording sound, put it in, because for a browser, the file sizes were just far too big. So when you're generating sounds with the JagFX synth, they're only coming out at about 4K every time, 4 or 5K maximum. But it gives you the flexibility to create sounds. They come out as 8-bit, but it's purely because we still use this for Old School RuneScape, and for Old School RuneScape, it's kind of now the iconic sound type. It's kind of what players accept for Old School.
It became part of the Sonic world.
Yeah. So RuneScape went through a couple of clients. We went through the browser, then we went through what they call the HD client, and then we ran through NXT client, which is what we're on now. But Old School RuneScape is actually taken from the old server tapes of 2007, which is before any of the refurbs happened with the tools or anything like that. So we had to essentially bring these old tools back to life in order to do the audio for the Old School engine. What you have in front of you is essentially RuneScape history, playing around for sound design. But essentially what you get out of it is the iconic sounds of Old School. So what you end up with is sounds that you can tailor for animations. You can still export them, plug them into the animation code. You can either export them as what we call .synth files, which is the lower band files, or you can export them as WAVs if you need to use them for, say, marketing material or anything like that. It's at the point where these sounds are recognized as being old school sounds. Old school is in 8-bit, but then Old School is in, it's the Old School brand for RuneScape. But just to give you a quick overview, we've got sound types on the left, so square wave, sine wave, depending on what you need. You've got your pitch and hertz over there. You've got your frequency bases up here. You've got amplitude modulation, amplitude range. File input is always good to keep track of. See where everything's going, drag them around. Change them. So why? But what you can do is you can, what we call with adding extra tones. So essentially this is one tone, but I can add up to 10. So I can make a stage sound with delays and loop points for each of the parts. So secondary sound I can delay. Third one also has a delay, but you play them together. It's part of a teleport casting spell sound.
So it's kind of a multi-timbral instrument, so to speak.
Essentially, yeah, you can. I can't find the example, but you can actually make a good beat out of this as well. You can do some bass drums and some hi-hats, should you want to do. We've done it we had it for our space game we were making, in that you were in the human quarter on an alien planet, and there was a bar, so of course there had to be a beat coming from the bar to let you know where to go. But yeah, that's the very quick explanation of the old JagFX synth tool.
And the tools you use today, you also have a synth, or you have kind of built something that allows you what we know today from today's middleware, like randomization, modulation, and these things into your in-house tool. And also you mentioned that you are editing music. So do you have kind of also a timeline where you can set some in-out points, jump points, etc., to tailor the music to different game states?
With RuneScape, let me find where I can stop sharing.
If you can talk about that.
Okay. No, that stuff I can talk about. So with RuneScape music system specifically, RuneScape music is actually done by what we call map square triggers. So we have area enter triggers for map square points. The surface world has music for essentially area or biomes, depending on what group or what category they're going to be in. On top of that, we can paint, essentially it's painting area exclusion zones within the map, so that if you're in this area and you meet a certain quest variable state, it's actually going to play the music that you stated and painted over the top of whichever state you need to be in. So we get to manipulate the game variables to kind of match our needs for those. And what we have is our tool called MapEd. You get the eds and x's on all the end of the tools, but what it does is you have your basic map level or layer, and then you have posing layers on top which aren't interactable with the player, but it means we can set different states and use those layers to paint down different conditions based on what's going on. It's why it kind of gets more tricky as the developers start to reuse more and more areas, because at a certain point you're going to get to a hard limit. So we have to kind of interpret which layer should be the higher priority, and then that's the point of the game variables, so we can keep track of what's going on and where and how to do it. So with the music for RuneScape, essentially you've got a vertical music system. Essentially it will go between track, between section. It will have stings to interrupt, stings to reset. It's things we've kind of learned from using middleware with other games that we can kind of recreate within our own engine, which is it's all part of learning and kind of doing. I mean, having worked with RuneScape when I started, and then having been on other projects, I found that because we've been doing things with Wise and with Unreal and Unity and Fabric, you get to recognize the consistency between the different middleware and things and the similarities. But it also means you're learning the techniques from those that you can then try and use with your own engine code, which has led to some interesting discussions with the engine coders to say, look at what this stuff's doing. Can we get this in engine anytime soon? They're like, yes, maybe. But RuneScape music system is slightly more on the simpler side, but it's also in its own way more effective for the story that it's trying to tell the players at the time.
Very much tailored to your specific
Very
needs
much
that
so.
RuneScape has, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's the same with old school RuneScape. The only difference between RuneScape and old school RuneScape is that old school uses it still uses MIDI files, and it also uses what we call the patch editor, which is our homemade instrument files. So when we were using captures or loops of instruments we've recorded, we then put them in the patch editor to create the instrument to then be able to use with the MIDI tracks, part of the engine with old school.
I would like at this stage probably to open for other questions so that we can see if anybody has something they would like to ask Grace for RuneScape or for the tools. Bill.
Okay, Grace, thanks so much for coming today and
That's okay.
talking. And I love your origin story. And I'm really curious as to within your organization, how many people are involved in the approval process for sound design versus music? And is one more difficult than the other to sort of get approved in the pipeline?
Not really. I've got to be quite honest, because everything that goes through audio is actually through me. Well, it's my approval and it's the dev approval as well. So we will have continuous meetings with the dev team because it's their baby, it's their little content that's going out. We make sure they're happy. We go through content briefs. We evaluate what's needed, and what's nice to do with the devs is also go through reference material with them so they know kind of style of music, what they're needing, and any kind of influences that they want to have within their content, because they're trying to tell a story and we want to make sure it's the right approach and that we convey what they intend to as well. So as long as they're happy with what we're producing for them, that's pretty much where we need to go. In terms of, if we're talking in terms of quality, that's very much us, because we will make our assets, make our tracks, and then it was up to us to review the quality standard that we've reached or where we're aiming for, what needs to be improved, whether or not we've hit a technical point where next time we're going to need technical integration, adaptation or changes in order to improve what we're doing. And then that goes into the technical development chain, which is a different team that we're running through, and that will go through that. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
This brings me to another question, actually. You mentioned the approval process. How does the community affect what you are changing, doing, when they have questions or wish lists, or how do you integrate the community into your development process?
So it's slightly different between RuneScape and Old School. So any content that goes out in Old School will not go out unless it's approved by the players. So everything gets polled through the public players before it's even put into development with the development teams on Old School. It's like the development.
Oh, so before you even start working on something, it's kind of a community approval process.
Old School is very much the community approval. If it's not signed off with the public poll, it will not be made for the content.
Wow, that is super interesting.
It's kind of, it was interesting. We weren't quite sure how it was going to work to start off with, but the Old School players, they're so dedicated. It's amazing because they know every ins and outs of that game. Even though it's from 2007, they know everything and they really wanted it back. So they are more than happy to make the effort to approve whatever's going in, understand what that impact they'll have in the game, and make sure that their kind of opinions are heard about it. And we try and do that with Old School because it's much more of a community feel. With RuneScape main, essentially, there's so many storylines and there's so much added content past the Old School cutoff, essentially, that it's too big to get approval for everything, because whenever you put out a new piece of content, you're always going to get players that aren't quite happy, or they don't agree with the storyline should have ended like this, or you didn't involve this character, which was there from 10 years ago or something, or other things like that. But we do have a team that are dedicated purely just to the lore of the game. It's our lore council, and they will know everything. If you ever have a question about who's this character and when do they pop up, you go and have a chat with the lore council. They will tell you everything. And I think the biggest impact when we're trying to put content together is we have to be aware of how it will affect other storylines and other areas, especially with the content, because you can do a quest in a certain area, but if it is adjoining to another storyline, is that going to affect the NPCs that are mapped on that surface area? Do you then need to take into account that the player may have not done certain quests to feed in? So it starts building a tree of options and variables and aspects going on.
So it seems this has been a very fortunate or well-working model for you. Mm-hmm. How's the team affected by working with the community, so directly being involved?
Quite happy. I mean, the players are generally quite receptive to when we chat with them through, it's normally through, we've got a ticketing system that people kind of put suggestions into for Old School main, RuneScape main, sorry. With Old School, it's much more of a closer dynamic because they are literally deciding what's going out in the schedule for the year. With RuneScape main, you're getting a lot of feedback from players, probably through social media more than anything, because they're happy to chat with you about the content that's gone out and talk to you about the music that's gone out, or rewrite your music for you because it wasn't quite the way they wanted it to work, or have a play around. But it's kind of tricky because there's so much history for players with this game. You have to be sympathetic to what's been going on and also how they played it. I think that's the interesting thing, because players, it's with any game really, you get players' experiences are incredibly unique no matter what the game is. And RuneScape has so much content that is interpreted by people differently. You have to be aware of the broader aspect of things. So when you are trying to make content and trying to tailor content for an experience of a new piece of, like a new area or a new skill, there's so many knock-on effects that you've got to test and be aware of. It can be quite confusing at times, I'm not going to lie. I know Cash has had fun trying to tease out different storylines and understand different factors, but yeah.
I think it's so gratifying as well, and you get the so good ideas you would never have thought of because other people are so much involved and enveloped in the lore.
It's crazy because we've had concept art done by players that have started quest lines. I mean, it's things like that
that is amazing.
It's phenomenal because you see some of the concept art that comes through from players through Twitter, and it will just get into twos and fro's with the other concept guys on the RuneScape team. They're like, "This is really great. Do you mind if we use it? We credit you with what's going in," and then they get to have a hand in what's going on with the content, not directly deciding what the content is, but trying to shape what's going in. So letting players have an input is why RuneScape has a big community feel. It's why we end up having, we haven't done it for a couple of years, but we used to do RuneFest, which was our big player event, where we literally got 2,500 RuneScape players in a big arena and just let them hang out together, play a game, put on a show, and just let them commune with each other. It's like clan members that hadn't seen each other or had never met each other kind of come together. We've had people do that. We've had wedding proposals for people that have met in RuneScape. It's crazy to think about. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, how it brings the whole people together. Yeah. That is really cool. So I'd like to open the stage again. Does anybody else have a question for William?
I think thanks for the talk, Grace. Really, really, really interesting. I couldn't agree more about all your points about portfolios and such. As someone who's fairly recently started with my current company and finished uni a couple of years ago, getting the portfolio right and also getting away from just sound redesigns of the game clips that everyone does. I couldn't agree with that more. With an MMO, something that I imagine you deal with are large player events where there could be potentially hundreds of emitters within one environment. I'd love to hear more about your kind of approach to prioritization and dynamic mixing, and how you're kind of considering things like what a player needs to hear at a certain point, performance, and how many CPU resources you're using, and also kind of your thought process for being able to prioritize these different assets based on, because you've stressed so heavily your community emphasis within RuneScape. What are people expecting to hear, and does that come into your kind of decision-making process?
I think it does very much so. I mean, when you're talking there's different types of players within RuneScape. So there's skillers, there's combat focused players, there's questers. Each of them have their own need for audio signals for the right reasons. Generally, when we're putting stuff in for a quest, we will focus on the quest aspects. If it's a boss fight, it's the combat that takes the priority. Obviously, if it's just skilling, then that's also the priority. So we will generally tailor priority-wise for whatever the content release is. When you get into an area when it's all 5 things all at once, that's when it gets a little bit on the chaotic side, because you could have a boss, but actually it's a skilling boss, and actually it's a skilling boss in a quest, which is then feeding into all the stat progression at once and all the area ambience that's mapped down, which is where we have to put the control in with multi-locks, and we have to use game variables to track everything with parameters, because there's no other way of doing it. It's like, I know if I've got the skilling boss in particular, there's probably going to be VO for the boss, there's going to be emotes for any attacks they're going to do, there's going to be area ambience, there's going to be probably mob NPCs that are going to be around them as well, there's going to be special VFX attacks that are running through, there's going to be music that's probably going to be changing based on whatever stage of boss it's going to be at. Normally phased progression is what we tend to do. I remember there's a boss called Solak we did that with. He's a giant tree boss, but we voiced him with Doug Cockle, which was quite exciting. It's like Geralt of Rivia, and he came in the office and we were very excited at the time. We had a proper geek out when it first started. But the music was done in phases to match the gameplay, but it also meant that we could tailor the sound effects at the right moment to get as much impact as possible. So you're right, there has to be a granular level of control for the sound aspect at each time, and it's good to be aware of the impact that can have on a player's experience, because there's going to be players, like you said, that will focus on one specific aspect and will need audio cues for that moment to tell them what to do, because it could be, especially if you've got, say, the skilling boss, so you've got everything overlapping. If they're a skilling player but they're not a boss player, they're not going to know that the boss cues are going to tell them the right thing. They would rather pick up on the skilling aspect, which is where those will override and place.
Right, so there's quite a lot of interrelationship between your different mechanics, the player community, and how that influences your thought process. Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's definitely a balance, and sometimes it can be a little bit much to play around with. So part of pre-production, when we're doing kind of a new piece of content, we will literally break down every aspect we need to be aware of. It's like, okay, there is a boss, these are the attacks they're doing. We've also got cutscenes which are going to interrupt at certain points. We know we're going to need VO for this aspect, but it also lets us kind of design the experience for the best reaction for the player as well, because we're talking about sound design flow for the player, but we're also talking about emotional flow through it as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a physical experience for the player, it's kind of that emotional journey as they're going along and as they're playing their content, especially if it's a big quest. There's a lot to be aware of in terms of if it's their favorite character that's going to be part of it. They want to know that they're getting voice acting or sometimes not voice acting, whether or not the character has a musical theme that we need to use or we need to update in the area to kind of mark it and play it through. So yeah, it's making sure you've got as much fact as possible before you do it, which is why we kind of insist on a pre-production phase before we do the content releases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
I have another.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
William, that was a great question. So thanks. I learned a lot from that question. Grace, do you, as far as your team, have you standardized the tool sets that the composers and the sound design are using to create the assets, or can they pretty much use whatever tools and doors and plugins that they're comfortable with?
It's normally whatever they're comfortable with. We have gone through phases where we've kind of been a bit more insistent, purely because we've been trying to keep track of licenses and that kind of aspect, and where it's gone a little bit awry, where people are coming in and out and taking licenses with them or things. But to be perfectly honest, we want to make people as comfortable as possible when they're trying to do their job. So most of our team are probably using Reaper as their main door. I know when we're doing composition work, most of us use Cubase or Nuendo. I'm still slightly of the older mind, so I use Audition for kind of my destructive stuff and some of my linear design stuff. And I also know that we've got one who sometimes still likes to use, it's on a Mac and I can't remember.
Is it only Mac? So it's Logic?
There you go, Logic, that's the one. There's a good reason for having consistency. Say if everyone's using Reaper, we can then build integration tools with Reaper to go into WWise. So we can use like Reaper XE tools. We can do custom code stuff. So longer term, it may be that if we start using Wise for more aspects, and should we ever maybe theorize putting Wise with RuneScape, that may be an aspect we end up going down. It may be better to standardize the tools to work, but at the moment it's not, the project you're working on does not determine what tools or what doors you need to use to make the assets.
And for sound effects that your team's working on,
Yes.
If there are any non-Foley effects that are being used, are those libraries basically coming from, the company purchases them and then distributes them, as opposed to the individual designers using whatever they have available to them, so that you're in the clear as far as licensing to get them in your game?
We have both. We've done cases where if we've needed specific libraries for game projects, we bought them for the amount that we need for the people that are on the team. And those libraries are still locked with user access for only the people that have the license access for them. So hence, for when we were working on Transformers, we bought a lot of sci-fi packs and like kind of robotic destruction packs. Those are locked off because I think I'm the only one with license access to those now, which is good for me, but not for everyone else. But in terms of other libraries, if we determine that we are missing something from our libraries that we need, we will buy it, and we will buy with licenses for everyone to be able to use it going forward. If we're at a point where we could buy, but we would like to do the recording ourselves, that's when we'll set up recording sessions either in-house, or we'll go out and do recording sessions to build the library that we need. Or we also just like to do Foley sessions ourselves and record and build our own library. We have a library folders of stuff we've bought, but then we've got library folders of our own stuff that we've recorded to use for that purpose as well. It just gives us a little bit of creative freedom just to kind of go, oh, you know what, I'm working on something, whether I need to make a coin flip or something, just record and go. We've each got microphones with us, so it's just a case of let's see what we can get and play and record. So there's nothing stopping us from recording assets, and it just makes an extra bit of fun for our jobs, really.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
What's the kind of threshold, Grace, for you to decide if you go and record things or buy it?
Cost is always step one. How much will it cost us to go and do it? We obviously have a budgetary amount on what we can spend that's allocated to outsourcing, which is where we would go and record stuff or not. It's also how much are we going to get out of it, and is it worth that cost as well? Because say if it's I don't know, one of the boom destruction libraries, which is an amazing library to get, and we've rinsed so much for bits and pieces, because there's so much in there you can kind of use and layer together with the sounds. And we bought that with the understanding that we were going to use it on one project, but we've actually used it for many projects, because with the licenses it would be stupid not to use it. And it's got to a point where we're kind of learning, okay, that's the cost of a library, but we now know the cost of hiring a company to record a bespoke library for us. So we know, say, we're going to need combat weaponry for these types of weapons. We know we've got this amount of budget, and we can go to, say, an external company and go, we'll give you a couple of days of recording. How much is that going to cost? What can you give us sample wise that will give us that? And then we kind of, it's an A/B. It's like, this is the cost of the library, or this is cost of something custom, but we know that's not going to be used by anyone else. And then that's the boundary point for us of how and where we're going to do it and who we're going to work with as well.
And then I imagine you have also some sound that are signature sounds that you, if you need more of something similar, you would also kind of record yourself or design yourself from something existing.
Yeah.
That is not easy to get.
Yeah. Anything that's kind of identifiable as, say, I don't know, RuneScape magic sounds are kind of all related as personal. If we do a replacement of a few of them, we'll do the whole set, and it will be based on synth that we've used originally, or it will be recorded aspects that we do. So if we do one of them, it will replace the whole lot. And the signature sounds is something we have to keep an eye on, and especially in terms of the marketing and the branding, because RuneScape as a brand has its own identity when it comes to the marketing side as well. So anything like logos or transition stings or anything to do with title cards and everything like that all comes from a central group that we recorded in batch, and then we will adapt for content releases. And every time any of the trailers went out with the releases, it was top and tail with those kind of sounds, but it was always that family of sounds that was made it. So even if we had to adapt it for like the second part of the content that was going out, we still had to make it fit. And I had some fun trying to add some extra layers into a certain type, because it was about the third boss version that was coming out during the year, but it's kind of adding them all together and kind of interpreting, because you kind of have to take on board what's already there and design your sound with that in mind, make it from the sound group and evaluate through.
Do you have some sort of special sounds that have a very personal story to you? I recently listened to a podcast with Mark Mangini, and he said he was so tired about the Wilhelm scream, and that we as sound designers should go out and create our own signature Wilhelm screams, something. And the person he was talking to said, yeah, he had a kind of a story of a dog that he recorded and puts into everything now. And I have I was hiking once, and I recorded a very cool cold wind sound through a tree. So I'm using that in all the places. And I know that was that hike. This is kind of my personal sound. What are your personal sounds?
I think for me, to my shame, I borrowed my dad's motorbike down a country lane, and I stuck a load of clip mics to it in different positions, not quite knowing what I was doing at such a young age. And I went up and down this dirt track, and then he caught me and started waving. And I was like, oh, he's waving, it's fine. And then, he was like, pull over and stop. And so I stopped, and one of the mics had blown up because it had come loose and landed straight to the exhaust. So it literally caught fire and just... But luckily, it had recorded the ignition. So that ignition sound generally goes into my explosions all the time, just because I love it so much. But yeah, haven't used it for a little bit. You've reminded me about it, actually. need to find it again. But yeah. I wrecked my clippy mics, but the motorbike was intact. That was the main thing.
Yeah. I find these stories so cool and personal, and you recognize your sounds then everywhere, and you also like to put them in. You can get 100 wind sounds, 100 explosion sounds, but if it's your sound that you recorded attached to the story of your dad waving, it makes it special, at least for you. Yeah. I say this has been a very interesting talk. Grace, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I had a great time. And thank you for the stories.
You're very welcome.
And for
the
and for the open sharing. I really appreciate it. That's what I think makes the sessions great, that we can learn and share.
Well, thank you for running these, because this is great. The fact that you're making the effort of running these, and you're running still labs to let people share their experience and share their portfolios, and just letting people have a space that they can get open feedback from people within the industry. That's very hard to do and hard to set up, and getting people involved. So well done to you too, Chris, because this is a great scheme.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of my passion, and I really like just supporting people. And you get so much back, as I said, inspiration, people from different parts of their career and life. It's so humbling and cool. I really like it. It's been a very cool experience. Getting to know all you people along the way. We're kind of hanging out now and having conversations on Twitter, and we know each other, and it's kind of cool sense of community. So thank you very much.